Hey everyone, I thought I would pick up reading The Hobbit. It's been a while. Put it down for quite a while. I'm gonna pick back up again and try to finish reading this book for you. This is chapter 10, entitled Warm Welcome. This is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. Day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land, came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff and deepest stream, had flowed lapping and bubbling. Suddenly the cliff fell away, the shores sank, the trees ended, then Bilbo saw sight. The lands opened wide about him, filled with the waters of the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools, dotted with islands on every side. But still, strong water flowed on steadily through the midst, and far away, its dark head in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. Its nearest neighbors to the northeast and the tumbled land adjoined it to them could not be seen. All alone, it rose and looked across the marshes to the forest, the lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he didn't like the look of it in the least. As he listened to the talk of the raftsmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall, he soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from this distance. Dreary as it had been, his imprisonment, and unpleasant was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarves underneath him. Still, he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went on the waterways and the growth of the traffic on the river as the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and of the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest, river, and the care of its banks. Those lands had changed much since the days when dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had of them, great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with the curse and an ominous nod of the direction of the mountain. The marshes and the bogs had spread wider and wider on either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider, many, many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost way across. The elf road, though, through the wood, which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Bjorn, now came to a doubtful and little used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the Wood Elves' king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins, shivering on the barrels, if he had known the news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him greater anxiety. And he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it. All he knew was that the river seemed to go on and on and on and on forever. He was hungry, and he had nasty cold in the nose and did not like it. The way the mountain seemed to frown at him and threaten him as it drew nearer and ever nearer. After a while, however, the river took a more southerly course, and the mountain receded again, and at last, late in the day, the shores grew rocky, and the river gathered all its wandering waters together into a deep and rapid flood, and they swept along at great speed. The sun had set when turning with another sweep towards the east, and the forest river rushed into the long lake. There, it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates at either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. The long lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water was not the sea, that was not the sea, could look so big. It was so wide, and that the opposite shores looked small and far, but it was so long that its northerly end, which pointed toward the mountains, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know the way, that way up there, where the stars of the Wain were already twinkling, and the running river came down into the lake from Dale, and the forest river filled the deep waters that must have been a great deep rocky valley. At the southern end, the doubled waters poured out again and over high waterfalls and ran away hurriedly to unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could be heard like a distant roar. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out at the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the water, the entering river by the promontory of the rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where on huge piles made of forest trees was built a busy wooden town. Not a town of elves, but of men who still dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. They still throve on the trade and that came up in the great river from the south and was carted past the falls to their own town. But in the great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful. There had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold and some with warriors in armor. And there had been wars and deeds which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the waters sank in a drought. But men remembered little of that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings in the mountain, Thror and Thrain, and of the race of Durin and the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in the rivers, and through the mountain gates, and all of the land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. Here's the Lake-towne. I always like to show pictures because, I like the pictures. As soon as the raft of barrels came in sight, boats rowed out from the piles of the town, and voices hailed the raft steerers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the forest river and towed away through the high shoulder of the rock into the little bay of Lake-towne. And there it was moored not far from the shoreward head of the great bridge. Soon men would come up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods that they had brought to be taken back upstream to the wood elves' home. In the meanwhile, the barrels were left afloat, and the elves of the raft, while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake-towne. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore. After they had gone and the shades of the night had fallen, first of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw was in his draggled beard, and he was sore and stiff and bruised and buffeted. He could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He was famished, and the savage looked like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have told it by his golden chain and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he could be even polite to the hobbit. Well, you are alive. Are you alive or are you dead? Asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal more than the dwarves, and also the use of his arms and legs, not to speak of a greater allowance of air. Are you still in prison or are you free? If you want food and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all and not mine. I had better slap your arm. You had better slap your arms and rub your legs and try to help me get the others out while there's a chance. Thorin, of course, saw the sense of this, so after a few more groans, he got up and helped the hobbit as well as he could in the darkness, floundering in the cold water. They had had a difficult and very nasty job finding which were the right barrels. Knocking outside and calling only discovered about 6 dwarves that could answer. These were unpacked and helped ashore, and where they sat or lay, muttering and moaning, they were so soaked and bruised and cramped that they could hardly yet realize their release or be properly thankful for it. Dwalin and Balin were 2 of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them to help. Bifur and Bofur were less knocked about and drier, but they lay and would do nothing. Fili and Kili, however, who were young for dwarves, and had also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw into smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or two and a stiffness that would soon wear off. I hope I never smell the smell of apples again, said Fili. My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlastingly when you can scarcely move and are cold and sick and with hunger is maddening. I could eat something in the whole, I could eat anything in the whole wide world now for hours on end, but not an apple. With the willing help of Fili and Kili, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bomber was asleep or senseless. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were waterlogged and seemed only half alive. They all had to be carried, one by one, and laid helpless on the shore. Well, here we are, said Thorin, and I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I'm sure that he has a right to expect it, though I wish he could have arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fed and recovered. In the meanwhile, what's next? I suggest Lake-towne, said Bilbo. What else is there? Nothing else, of course, he suggested. So, leaving the others, Thorin and Fili and Kili and the hobbit went along the shore to the great bridge. There were guards at the head of it, and they were not keeping a very careful watch, for it was so long since there had been any real need, except for occasional squabbles about river tolls. They were friends of the wood elves. Other folk were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and the grammars who said that they had seen him flying in the sky in their young days. That being so, it is not surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by the fire in their hut, and they did not hear the noise of the unpacking of the dwarves and the footsteps of the four scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped in through the door. "Who are you and what do you want?" they shouted, leaping to their feet and groping their weapons. "Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain," said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it, in spite of the torn clothes and the draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and waist, and his eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back, and I wish to see the master of your town." And there was tremendous excitement. Some of more foolish ran out of the hut, and they expected the mountain to go golden in the night, and all of the waters of the lake turn yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. "And who are these?" he asked, pointing to Fili and Kili and Bilbo. "The sons of my father's daughter," answered Thorin. "Fili and Kili of the race of Durin, and Mr. Baggins, who has traveled with us out of the west." "If you come in peace, lay down your arms," said the captain. "We have none," said Thorin. And it was true enough. Their knives had been taken away from them by the wood elves, and the great sword Orcrist, too. Bilbo had his short sword hidden, as usual, but he said nothing about it. "We have no need of weapons, who return at last to our own as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master." "He is at feast," said the captain. "Then all the more reason for taking us to him," burst in Fili, who was getting impatient with these solemnities. "We are worn and famished after a long road, and we've sick comrades. Now make haste and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you." "Follow me, then," said the captain, and with 6 men about, they led them over the bridge, through the gates, and into the marketplace of the town. This was a wide circle of quiet water, surrounded by the tall piles on which there were built great houses, and by long wooden quays with many steps and ladders, and going down to the surface of the lake. And from the great hall shone many lights, and there came a sound of many voices. They passed its doors and stood blinking at the light, looking at long tables and filled with folk. "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, of Thror, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return," cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leapt to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raftsmen of the elves, who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond, dwarves that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." "Is this true?" said the master. As a matter of fact, he thought far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person had ever existed. "It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the Elf King and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land," answered Thorin. "But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old. Nor is this town in the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town of the men of the lake, not to the raftmen of the king. Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The elven king was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and toils, to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position. Others were of different mind. However, quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like a fire through all the town. People were shouting inside the hall and outside, and the quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain, that it was Thor's grandson, not Thor himself, that not had come back, did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. The king beneath the mountains, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver fountains shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his halls shall echo golden to songs of yore resung. The wood shall wave on mountains and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains, and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn. All sorrow fail and sadness, all the mountain at the mountain king's return. I'll stop there for today. That's about midway through the chapter. So that ends part 1 of chapter 10, The Warm Welcome. And once again, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Hope you're enjoying it, and I'll try to catch up soon.